Over a fall weekend about 8 years ago, my family and I went on a group retreat type of thing. My husband and I, and our 3 girls, all under age 10 at the time. This was an annual occurrence, but we were flush that year as a result of our company doing really well. Because of that, we avoided the communal bunkhouses and decided to rent a camper. The RV rental place explained that it would cost the same for 3 nights as it would for 2, so we decided we'd return it on Monday despite the retreat being over on Sunday. The weekend was great. It was super hot and we were happy to have AC for a change. We didn't notice it at the time due to different people being in and out all day and being outside doing activities, but the previous renters hadn't bothered to clean out the septic lines in the camper. By 6 o'clock Sunday evening, it stunk horribly, and it was backing up into the toilet. My husband was anxious about the rental company blaming us, so he decided to go to the Walmart in the neighboring town for some drain cleaner. Mind you, this particular location, while open all year, is rarely occupied outside of these group retreats. It was privately owned by a church in the area, and they used it mainly for their own purposes and events. So my husband leaves around 8:30 p.m. for Walmart. It's an hour-plus round trip thanks to the rural area and skinny back roads. I start straightening the camper, packing our belongings, and getting the kids settled for the trip home the next day. Afterwards, I curled up in the back bedroom to read and wait for my husband to get back in case he needed any help. The lights had been out for about 20 minutes when I started hearing a clicking sound. It was coming from the window behind the bed. I froze up instantly and ran through a self-reassuring checklist. It could be the trees scraping the glass, an axe murderer, or a sound in the environment nearby. That was an option as well. I got up and walked very slowly to the kitchen. The noise followed me. As I was climbing up into the loft area over the cab, I heard the door handle rattle, and then a scraping sound. I had grabbed a knife from the kitchen as I passed through, and I was clutching it in my sweaty hands as I hunkered down on the edge of the bed in the loft, guarding my children. I had made sure every access point was locked and hoped that whoever it was would go away. It was definitely a whoever at this point. It was about 5 minutes of torture later that I saw headlights through the windows on the side, coming along the winding road to the RV sites, and my husband entered the cabin. I told him what I was afraid of, and he looked at me weird, then scoffed at me for being a city girl, and told me that people don't break out of prison and attack families in random campgrounds. I told him that I'd heard the door rattling, and that it wasn't a coincidence of nature, but he brushed me off anyway. We got through the night without further incident, although I was too on edge to sleep. The next morning, we drove into town to return the RV. On the once-over demanded by the rental agreement, the manager came around to my husband and asked if he knew what had happened to the rear window. It looked like someone had used a switchblade or some similar item to remove the rubber gasket from around the back bedroom window, the same bedroom where I had been reading the night before. There were gashes in the paint consistent with knife marks, and the gasket had been almost completely hacked off. The window and door locks were also damaged. It seems whoever did this had tried inserting the knife between the door jamb and the lock in another attempt to gain entry. Fortunately, they didn't get in, and we were not charged for the damage to the RV. Needless to say, I never went on a solo camping trip again, and we always go in larger groups now. Still, it makes the hair on my neck stand up, and we never went back to that campground. My friend and I are both 23-year-old males from New York. This happened to us just last month. We decided to go on a 2-night backpacking and camping trip in the Adirondack Mountains of the state. We are both very comfortable with nature and spend a lot of time camping, hunting, fishing, etc. We hiked about 5 miles from where we parked the car up to a small lake and set up camp on a small beach. This was not a heavily trafficked area, and we did not expect to run into anyone. Our first night there, as we were sitting around the fire, we saw a light moving on the other side of the lake at around 10:30. This was fairly unusual. However, we did not think too much about it. But as time went on, this light kept moving around the lake, getting closer to our campsite. We kept discussing who could possibly be wandering around the woods in the middle of the night, and we did not particularly want an unwelcome guest. Once it was clear that the person or persons were heading for our campsite, we moved off into the woods nearby to see who wandered up. I took a small axe with me, just in case, and he had a .22 rifle. Now, we weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. The moment of truth arrived as a shining flashlight came near the light of our fire, and we saw that it was just one man. We can see that he is scruffy looking, has a beard, and is probably in his mid to late 40s. The scary part was that he was carrying what turned out to be a pump-action shotgun. He walked around the campsite a few times and then proceeded to enter our tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he came out and started yelling, "I know you're out there. Why don't you come out and say hello?" My friend and I remained motionless under a hemlock tree about 50 yards away. That is when the man decided to fire his shotgun several times into the woods not too far from where we were. He looked around a few times, then grabbed my friend's backpack and a few articles of clothing we had drying off near the fire and threw them in to burn, then swung his flashlight around several times. My friend, who had trained his rifle on the man, whispered to me, asking if he should shoot. I told him absolutely not unless he spots us and starts to point the gun in our direction. After what felt like hours, the man wandered back the direction he had come. We did not dare move until his flashlight was on the other side of the lake. Then we ran out, grabbed everything we could fit in my pack, and took off. We ran out the trail with flashlights and made it back to my car as the sun was coming up. We immediately went to the police department and reported it, where we also spoke with some forest rangers. I haven't heard anything back from the police. It wasn't exactly mysterious. However, it creeped the hell out of both of us. I was a 19-year-old female at the time this happened. Still female, of course, just a little older. I love camping, and anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car that I borrowed from a friend, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help if I needed to. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over on my right, then see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of wood that I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. At around 1 in the morning, I decide to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern, making the campsite completely dark. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars, so I passed out relatively quick. At about 2 in the morning, I start hearing footsteps, and they sound pretty light, almost timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or some other animal like before. More likely a raccoon, because I had probably left some food out. Regardless, I still feel on guard. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't crap myself, but I just sat there, paralyzed, with my knife in hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then, as suddenly as it began, it all stopped. The tent fabric wasn't being pushed in anymore, and there were no more footsteps. I started feeling slightly more secure because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure wasn't about to go to sleep. At about 4 o'clock, I decide that I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm suddenly starts blaring. I immediately freak out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I opened my mouth to scream, but instead, I feel a person's pinky finger slipping between my teeth. Immediately, I clamped my teeth down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous, but the finger popped clean off. I hear a man scream, and he pulled his hand away, with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill that I was camping on, and I took off in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife-beater, boxers, and steel-toed boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I had managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened, and they called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me even more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can, so he could have just lit me on fire even earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting that he had come back. They never caught the guy, and I never saw my assailant, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky.